All right, gamers. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about how to start writing your story. All right, gamers. Welcome back to Game Master's Dungeon. I'm Brian, your Game Master. Today, we're going to talk about getting your story off the ground. How to start putting all of your thoughts onto paper to be ready for your first game of your campaign, your chronicle, whatever it is you're playing. So we're gonna touch on some of the topics that I've talked about in previous videos of this series. If you haven't gotten caught up, I would go back and either look through all of those, watch them, get caught up to where we're at. So once you've done that and you're ready, let's go ahead and get into it. All right, gamers. So I hope you're ready. So let's get into it. All right, so we're going to start writing to be ready for our first game. So first, what we need to start with the plot diagram. Here, okay? So hope you've got one. If it's not this, something similar, okay? And you've already got this filled out. This is all the prep work. Lots of prep work to go into your first game. So you've got this. This one is going to be for the entire campaign, chronicle, story. This is going to be a list of the notes of everything that's going to happen. Okay? Now, then I hope you've using other ones for other plot points, right? Because you're going to have different plot points that are going to happen during the course of the game. At least I like to include them, like side stories, plots that are going to help develop the player characters and things like that. That's an advanced topic for later discussion. This is just how are we going to get ready for our first game? How are we going to get our story from here to the paper, to the page, into the game? Okay? So you've got your plot diagram. You've got your plot diagram filled out. And now you're like, all right, cool. This sounds like a really good story. How do we start? Okay? So let's talk about that. So I'm going to tell you how I like to do it. Okay. Now, like I said, this is my way. I'm a pretty experienced GM. Been doing it for a lot of years. So some of you might understand. You might be able to do this. Some of you, especially if you're newer GMs, might be like, oh, well, maybe I don't have the experience to just kind of what I like to call shooting from the hip kind of thing. But I'll kind of go over what I like to do. So what I like to do, so I take my plot diagram, and the first thing, right, is the exposition, right? So that's going to be introducing the characters, the story, the setting, the theme, the mood, your villains, your conflict. A lot of introductions are going on. The characters get to know each other. They get to know the problem. They get to know the villain. Things like that. The first story is actually one of the easiest ones to write. It's later on when you're trying to do all these other things, which is a topic for a later discussion, that are going to be the more challenging stories to write. So let's go back to our how to get started. So obviously you're going to find a way to introduce your characters to the game. A couple of examples that I've liked to use. I've liked to use the group is already a team or an adventuring group, and then I kind of like to go into some narration on how they met, or I kind of leave the discussion open to the players, how they met. An important point that when you let players kind of do the narration of backstories and previous stuff like this, take notes. Jot them down on your paper, right? Because this stuff can be useful in later plots and storylines that you're going to attempt to run, right? Pro tip right there. Take notes. So either you're going to come up with a way on how they've met, or you're going to let them do it. So then once they do that, then you're going to let them kind of describe their characters and things like that. And then you're going to get into the meat, like what's going to be happening in your first game. Now, what's going to be happening in that first game, obviously going to be up to you. You will want to introduce the setting, the theme, and the mood. So when, like time period, like it's 2018, it's the middle of April in Chicago or whatever. So people can kind of rationalize, oh yeah, I understand what that is. But if you're trying to do something, oh, it's 500 years in the future on a distant planet, you're going to have to be a little more descriptive in the things that are going on, right? This is where you're going to want to, especially for you newer GMs, maybe run a game that's closer to what your players are going to be able to easily understand. Current time periods, current topics, and things like that. Or you can do other stuff in different time periods and settings. You're just going to have to, like I said, be more descriptive on the information that they're going to need to play in that time period. Okay, so the characters are introduced. You've introduced the setting, the theme, and the mood. The next point then would be to introduce your antagonist, your villain, which then couples with conflict. So it's either one or the other. Either there's conflict, right? There's something that happens that's going to drive the story forward. That will then lead to the introduction of the antagonist or the villain. Or you can introduce the villain, which causes the conflict. Either way, I mean, there's probably a couple other ways you could do it, but I'll just give you a couple examples right there. So that's what you're going to need to determine is what that next step is. Once everybody's met and once you've described everything, and then everybody just kind of gets to just run wild. Don't let them run wild, but let them feel that they can just kind of do whatever. Then you're going to go on to the next step, right? The next introduction. Now, the key here is, in what I like to do, is once I'm transitioning from like the beginning of the exposition to like the next plot point, right? The villain shows up or the conflict or whatever the problem is. I kind of let the players do what they want, quote unquote. I let them feel like they do what they want. And then once they get to a place where I can introduce this, I drop it on them. They're like, okay, instead of me writing like, okay, they need to go, if they go here or if they go do this, then this will happen. What if they never do that or go there? This is where you're going to, a lot of people will pigeonhole themselves or get to this tunnel vision that, like a video game, like I go from point A to point B, then the storyline will take me to C, and the storyline will take me to D. Now, this is kind of like a sandbox, right? They roam around, they do their thing. Then you introduce the plot point. Okay, so now we've introduced the next plot. So say the villain shows up and causes some conflict, right? So maybe then there's that first combat scene, especially if you're a newer GM. This could be a tutorial battle, right? You fight some minions or some henchmen or something to kind of get their feet wet with the combat system. Don't make it too difficult, but don't make it too easy. Obviously, that's a topic for like a whole nother video on managing combat encounters in games. But this is where you're going to learn as well, especially if you're new to a system or if you're new to GMing, how well to balance your encounters. So villain shows up, introduction of combat in this example. Okay, once the combat's done, then you can take the next plot point that you've got in your exposition. Boom, you can drop that. Then the story will continue on from there. And then once, you describe the next thing, and then they get to make choices. Then once they get to an acceptable point where you can drop in the next plot point or the next thing that needs to happen or whatever, then you can drop it in right there. So basically, what we're doing is we are narrating to a point where the players can do what they want. You give them the idea of free action, which they do. They can kind of do whatever they want in your game within the limits that you set. But then once they get to, like I said, the particular point is when you drop the next plot point. And then they have to make decisions on what to do next, which then will, regardless of really what they do, will lead them to the next plot point. And like I said, this is how I like to do it. I don't like to pigeonhole myself because I role play mainly, with some crafty people sometimes, and they'll make decisions of like, oh well, I had this great encounter planned out for wherever, in the subway tunnel or whatever. What if they never go to the subway tunnel to progress the story? What do I do? Right? This is why I will just prepare those points off of that plot diagram. Like as an example, okay, introductions. Then the next one would be villain shows up, combat. Then whatever the next point would then be, you know, kidnapping, right? Of somebody important to maybe one of the characters or whatever, right? So we've done the exposition, but now we've got some conflict, some threat. Maybe your whole story is that maybe someone important is kidnapped, and the whole story is to go rescue this person. Or you plan your story around you rescuing the person, but then something else will happen toward the end of that point, which will then go, to the rest. It's really up to you. And now, it may sound like I'm not giving you a lot of like step-by-step how and what to do, right? I can't tell you what to write because the story is yours. It is your creation. It's your baby, right? You're breathing life into it. It's yours, not mine. All I can tell you is that how I like to tell my stories and how I like to prepare for my stories and how I like to write my stories. I hope you've gained some information from this video. Like I said, it may seem very vague, but that's kind of the nature of role-playing games because the people that play are so diverse on how they think and what they want to do in their games. I can just kind of give you some tips and some tools to kind of help make that storytelling easier. All right, gamers, so let's just do a recap right quick of kind of what I've talked about, right? So use your plot diagram. You're getting ready for your first game. You're going to write your first game. So whatever you're writing, so input, this is my story, right? These are the things that I want to happen. So you're going to do the exposition, introduce everyone, introduce a villain or an antagonist, conflict of some kind, something that's going to drive the plot forward. Let the players make free decisions, right? Like I said, this is how I like to do it. However you like to do it is up to you. I let them do what they want, and then once they get to an acceptable place, I introduce the next plot point. That's going to drive the story forward. Now, during this whole time, I'm taking notes because you're going to need NPCs. You're going to need other people in the story, things, places. Take a bunch of notes of things that you're going to need to create for the next game. So after you end your first game session, you're going to have a list of notes of things that will need to be created, certain NPCs, places, whatever, planets, societies, whatever, for the next game. So in your downtime between your game sessions, you're going to create that stuff. Then the next game session, you pick up where you left off. The players will do their actions. They're going to do what they want to do. Once they get to a particular place, drop the next plot point on them, taking notes during. It's just a constant cycle as you're climbing that plot chart up. That's going to lead, and as we're going up that plot point, you're hitting your points, leading up to the climax, and then you're going to go down. All the while, the players are going to feel like they're driving the story forward, which they are by their actions, but in reality, you're the one that's driving the story forward. It's just how they get to each point is up to them. All right, gamers. So I hope this video was helpful and hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button if you want to support me. Also hit the subscribe button and that bell icon so you get notifications when I upload new content so you can be the first to view and to comment. I would like to say I have been tossing around this idea of doing a live stream on YouTube once a week or so, talking specifically about story writing, playing the sessions, the narrating, the role-playing part, and other topics that you guys would have questions on. Because I get a lot of comments about a bunch of different questions, and some of that I can do videos on. Some of it would just be kind of like open mic kind of thing. While live stream would be great. You can come in, you can ask your questions. I can give you my thoughts. Some of the other people that would be in the stream as well can give you their thoughts. We can make it like a collective experience. If you would be interested in something like that, please leave it in the comments below. If I get enough requests for something like that, I'll make it happen. Also, be sure to join my Discord server. Link will be in the description box below. So you can come over there if you've got questions that you want to ask. You can ask them there. Either I will be on most days. I mean, I do work full time, but I'll try to be on as often as I can. Also, there's quite a lot of other people over there that have a lot of experience as well. So they might be able to give you some good advice on your question that you would be asking, just to kind of help you out and so we can help each other out. Also, follow me over on Twitter if you want. I'm posting updates on content that I'm producing and occasionally what I'm doing in my gaming life, like the games that I'm running and things like that. Plus, I'd like to see what you guys are doing in your gaming lives as well and get some feedback on how you guys are doing with your stories you're writing or the questions that you're asking and then the answers you're getting and if they're helping you out. Okay? So, until I see you again in the dungeon, I'm Brian, your Game Master, and happy gaming.